Captain Jake Morrison sat in his command chair, watching the stars drift past through the main view screen of the USS Defiant. The ship moved through space at a steady pace, patrolling the outer edges of Coalition territory. It was quiet work, but Jake preferred it that way. After 20 years in the service, he had learned to appreciate the peaceful moments between crises. The bridge hummed with the usual sounds of a working starship. Maria Santos, his chief engineer, was running diagnostics. On the quantum drive, Ryan Blake, the tactical officer, monitored long-range sensors for any signs of trouble. Dr. Lisa Park sat at the science station, studying star formation patterns in nearby nebulae. The crew of 180 souls went about their daily routines, unaware that their quiet patrol was about to become something far more dangerous. Jake sipped his coffee and reviewed the daily reports. Supply levels were good. Crew morale was high. The ship's systems were running at peak efficiency. Everything seemed normal in their small corner of the galaxy. He had no way of knowing that normal was about to become a thing of the past. First sign of trouble came from the communications station. Lieutenant Davis looked up from his console with a confused expression. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange on the emergency frequencies." "What kind of strange?" Jake asked, setting down his coffee. "It's fragmentary, sir. Coming from the direction of the core worlds, but the signal is badly corrupted. There's a lot of interference." Jake walked over to the communications station. "Let me hear it." Davis played the recording. Static filled the bridge, broken by brief moments of clear transmission. Jake could hear voices, but they were cut off and distorted. What he could make out chilled him to the bone. There were screams mixed with fragments of military chatter. Someone was shouting about retreat. Another voice mentioned casualties in the billions. "Clean it up as much as you can," Jake ordered. Davis worked at his console for several minutes, applying filters and signal enhancement protocols. When he played the recording again, it was clearer, but no less disturbing. "All Coalition forces. This is Admiral Watson at Central Command. Retreat immediately from all forward positions. Do not attempt to engage the enemy. Repeat, do not engage. The Devourers have returned from dark space. All outer colonies are lost. Estimated casualties are in the hundreds of billions and rising. May the stars have mercy on us all." The message cut to an automated emergency broadcast that repeated the same information in a dozen different languages. Jake felt his blood turn to ice. The Devourers were supposed to be ancient history, a nightmare from the old stories that Coalition children learned about in school. "Sir?" Ryan Blake looked up from his station. "Long-range sensors are picking up multiple quantum signatures moving toward the core systems. Whatever's happening out there, it's big." Jake returned to his command chair, his mind racing. The Devourers were real, and they had returned after 1,000 years of silence. According to the old records, they were not simply another hostile, alien species. They were something far worse. The ancient texts described them as a collective consciousness that consumed entire star systems, turning matter and energy into extensions of themselves. "Maria, how long would it take us to reach the core systems at maximum speed?" he asked. The chief engineer looked up from her console. "About 18 hours, Captain. But, sir, if the emergency broadcast is accurate, we might not want to go there." "Why not?" "Because according to every historical record we have, nothing that encounters the Devourers survives. They adapt to any weapon, counter any strategy, and turn captured ships into part of their collective. The last time they appeared, it took the combined fleets of 12 species to drive them back into dark space." Dr. Park turned from her science station. "Captain, I've been monitoring subspace communications. There's been no contact with any Coalition fleet for the past 6 hours. The core worlds have gone completely silent." Jake stared at the view screen, weighing his options. Fleet protocol was clear in situations like this. When faced with an overwhelming threat, individual ships were supposed to retreat to defensive positions and await orders. The logical thing to do was to set course for human space and warn Earth about the coming danger. But Jake Morrison had not become a starship captain by always following the logical choice. Somewhere out there, billions of innocent people were dying or worse. If the Coalition fleet had been destroyed, the Defiant might be the only ship left in position to gather intelligence about the enemy. "Ryan, what's our tactical status?" he asked. "Full weapons loadout, sir. Shields at maximum efficiency. We're as ready for a fight as we can be." "Maria, how are our engines?" "Running perfectly, Captain. The quantum drive can give us faster-than-light travel for days without stopping." Jake made his decision. "Set course for the core systems. Maximum speed." "Sir?" Dr. Park looked concerned. "Are you sure about this? We could be flying straight into a trap." "Maybe," Jake admitted. "But we need to know what we're dealing with. If the Devourers have really returned, then every remaining ship in the galaxy needs to know their capabilities and weaknesses. Someone has to get close enough to gather that information." "And if we don't survive the encounter?" Ryan asked. Jake looked around the bridge at his crew. These people had served with him for years. They trusted his judgment even when it led them into dangerous situations. He owed them honesty about what they were facing. "Then we'll make sure our observations get transmitted back to Earth before we go down. The human fleet needs to know what's coming." The next few hours passed in tense preparation. The crew worked to optimize every system on the ship. Weapons were charged and ready. Shields were reinforced. The quantum drive was pushed to its maximum safe output, hurling the Defiant through space toward what might be their doom. As they traveled deeper into Coalition space, the signs of disaster became more apparent. Automated distress beacons drifted in empty space where colonies used to be. The usual background chatter of commercial traffic had fallen silent. Even the stars seemed dimmer somehow, though Jake knew that was probably his imagination. Dr. Park spent her time analyzing the fragmentary data they had about the Devourers. What she found was not encouraging. The ancient records described beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. They could adapt to any attack within minutes of first encountering it. They turned captured technology into twisted versions of itself, creating weapons that were more effective than the originals. "Captain," she reported, "according to these files, the Devourers don't just destroy civilizations, they integrate them. Every person they capture becomes part of their collective consciousness, but they remain aware of their individual identity. Imagine being trapped inside your own mind, while your body is used to attack your former friends and family." Jake shuddered at the thought. It was worse than death. It was eternal torment combined with the knowledge that you were being forced to harm others. When the Defiant finally dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of what had been the Coalition's most populated system, Jake understood why the ancient records called the Devourers the galaxy's worst nightmare. Where thriving worlds should have been, there was only darkness and the twisted remnants of a once great civilization. "My God," Ryan whispered, staring at the sensor readings. "What have they done?" Jake gripped the arms of his command chair and prepared to find out. Whatever happened next, the crew of the USS Defiant would face it together. They were just one ship against the galaxy's most ancient and terrible enemy, but they were human. That had to count for something. The USS Defiant moved through space like a ghost, its hull modified with every piece of equipment the crew could spare. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching the stars ahead grow brighter as they approached their destination. Behind them lay 3 days of the hardest work any of them had ever done. Ahead lay certain death and the slim hope of victory. Maria Santos had transformed the ship's quantum drive into something that no engineer had ever attempted before. Instead of creating controlled tiers in space-time for faster-than-light travel, the modified system would rip reality apart in an expanding wave of destruction. The mathematics were terrifying and beautiful at the same time. "How are the modifications coming along?" Jake asked his chief engineer. Maria looked up from her console, exhaustion clear on her face. We've rerouted every spare power conduit into the quantum core. When we trigger the cascade, the ship will have about 30 seconds before the reaction tears us apart. That should be enough time for the disruption wave to begin propagating through subspace. Dr. Lisa Park worked frantically at her science station, making final calculations. The targeting data is complete, Captain. We need to position ourselves within 10,000 kilometers of the main processing facility for maximum effect. Any further away, and the cascade might not reach all of their fleet concentrations. Ryan Blake monitored the tactical display, tracking the movements of Devourer ships as they prepared for their final assault on human space. Sir, long-range sensors show massive fleet movements. They're pulling ships back from the outer systems and concentrating them around the processing facilities. It's like they're preparing for something big. Jake nodded grimly. The enemy was gathering their forces for the coordinated attack that would destroy every remaining free world in the galaxy. In less than 24 hours, the Devourer fleets would spread out again, making it impossible to catch them all in a single cascade reaction. This is our only chance, Jake said to his crew. If we wait any longer, they'll be too spread out for the quantum disruption to affect their entire force. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Geneva system. The massive processing facility had grown even larger since their last visit, fed by the resources of a dozen conquered worlds. Biomechanical ships swarmed around it like insects around a hive, their twisted hulls gleaming with the same sickly green light. Sensor count shows over 15,000 enemy vessels in this system alone, Ryan reported. They've concentrated most of their fleet here for the final push toward Earth. Jake felt a cold satisfaction. The Devourers had unknowingly made his job easier by gathering so many ships in one place. If the quantum cascade worked, it would cripple their entire invasion force at once. Begin the approach, he ordered. Keep us hidden as long as possible. The Defiant crept forward through the asteroid field that surrounded the system, using the dead rocks for cover. The crew worked in tense silence, knowing that discovery would mean failure for their mission and doom for their species. As they moved deeper into the system, the true scope of the Devourer operation became clear. The processing facility was not just converting matter and energy anymore. It was building something new, a massive construct that dwarfed even their largest ships. Dr. Park's scans revealed that it was some kind of gateway device. "Captain, I think they're building a portal," she reported with growing alarm. "If I'm reading these energy signatures correctly, they're creating a permanent link to dark space. They could bring their entire civilization through to our galaxy." Jake felt his blood turn to ice. The invasion fleet was just the beginning. The Devourers were planning to relocate their entire species to the Milky Way, turning it into their new hunting ground. Every world, every star system, every living thing would become part of their collective. How long until that gateway is operational? He asked. Dr. Park ran quick calculations. Based on the construction rate, less than 6 hours. Once it's complete, stopping them will become impossible. The timeline had just become even more desperate. They needed to trigger the quantum cascade before the gateway came online, or their sacrifice would be meaningless. "Maria, can we accelerate our approach?" Jake asked. His chief engineer shook her head. "We're already pushing the engines beyond safe limits. If we go any faster, we'll be detected for sure." As if summoned by her words, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Ryan Blake looked up from his tactical console with a grim expression. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV. It's one of their scout ships, and it's heading straight for us." Jake watched the approaching biomechanical vessel on the main screen. It moved with predatory grace, its hull shifting and adapting as it closed the distance. There was no way to avoid detection now. "Red alert. All hands to battle stations," Jake commanded. "We fight our way to the target." The scout ship opened fire with living weapons that twisted through space like hunting animals. The Defiant's shields flared as the bio-missiles struck, their acidic payloads eating away at the protective barriers. More enemy ships began converging on their position from all directions. "Return fire," Jake ordered. "But don't waste ammunition trying to destroy them. Just keep them back long enough for us to reach the facility." The running battle that followed was unlike anything in Jake's 20 years of military experience. The Devourer ships adapted to every tactic within minutes, forcing the crew to constantly change their strategy. What started as a fight against 3 scout ships quickly became a desperate race against dozens of enemy vessels. Maria worked frantically to keep the engines running as biomechanical weapons tore at the ship's hull. "Captain, I'm reading multiple hull breaches. The quantum drive is holding, but I don't know for how long." Dr. Park monitored their approach to the processing facility. 8,000 kilometers to target. We're almost in range for the cascade." More enemy ships joined the battle, their twisted forms filling the space around the Defiant. Jake watched his crew fight with desperate courage, knowing that each passing minute brought them closer to their goal and their doom. 5,000 kilometers, Dr. Park announced. "We're within effective range." Jake opened a ship-wide communication channel. "All hands, this is the captain. We've reached our target. Prepare for quantum cascade initiation." But as Maria began the final activation sequence, she discovered a terrible problem. The damage from the battle had affected the quantum core's containment systems. The cascade reaction would begin immediately upon activation, giving them no time to get into position. "Captain, I can't control the timing," she reported with anguish. "The moment I trigger the cascade, we have maybe 10 seconds before the reaction consumes the ship. We need to be at the exact center of the facility for maximum effect." Jake looked at the tactical display. They were still 3,000 kilometers from the optimal position. At their current speed, it would take another 5 minutes to reach the target, but they didn't have 5 minutes. The Devourer ships were closing in from all sides. "There's only one way to do this," Maria said quietly. "Someone has to manually trigger the cascade from inside the quantum core chamber. The radiation will be lethal within seconds, but it will give us the time we need to reach the target." Jake stood up from his command chair. "I'll do it." "No, sir," Maria said firmly. "This is an engineering problem. I know those systems better than anyone. Besides, someone needs to command the ship during the final approach." Ryan Blake looked up from his station. "Maria's right, Captain. We need you on the bridge." Jake wanted to argue, but he knew they were right. The final minutes of their mission would require precise coordination from the command crew. Maria was the only one who fully understood the modified quantum systems. "Are you sure about this?" he asked his chief engineer. Maria Santos smiled sadly. "I've been sure since the moment we decided to do this mission. Take care of my ship, Captain. Get her to the target." She sealed herself in the engineering section and began the long walk to the quantum core chamber. As radiation alarms began sounding throughout the ship, Jake ordered the final approach to begin. The USS Defiant raced toward the heart of the Devourer processing facility, its hull glowing from enemy fire and its quantum core building toward a reaction that would either save the galaxy or accomplish nothing at all. In the engine room, Maria Santos worked with dying hands to give her ship and her species one last chance at survival. Maria Santos felt the radiation burning through her body as she worked at the quantum core controls. The chamber around her glowed with deadly energy that would have killed an unprotected person in seconds. Her hands shook as the poisonous light ate away at her cells, but she kept working. Everything depended on her getting the timing exactly right. Through the communication system, she could hear Captain Jake Morrison directing the final approach to the Devourer processing facility. Enemy ships surrounded the USS Defiant on all sides, their biomechanical weapons tearing at the hull with increasing fury. But the ship pressed forward, driven by the courage of its crew and the desperate hope of an entire galaxy. 2,000 kilometers to optimal position, Dr. Lisa Park announced over the ship's speakers. "Maria, how are you doing down there?" Maria tried to answer, but her throat was too damaged by radiation. Instead, she focused on the control panel in front of her. The quantum cascade was building power, ready to tear reality apart in an expanding wave of destruction. She just needed to hold on a little longer. 1,000 kilometers, Dr. Park called out. Almost there. The ship shuddered as a massive biomechanical creature attached itself to the hull directly above the engineering section. Maria could hear the sound of acid eating through the armor plating. In minutes, maybe seconds, the Devourers would break through and flood the ship with their corrupted forces. 500 kilometers. Maria, we need the cascade now. Maria's vision was fading, but her hands found the final control sequence. She thought about her family back on Earth, about the children who would grow up free if this worked. With her last breath, she activated the quantum cascade that would either save or doom them all. The effect was immediate and beyond anything the crew had expected. Light erupted from the quantum core, but it was not the harsh light of destruction. Instead, it was a pure, clean radiance that spread through the ship and out into space like ripples on a pond. The biomechanical creature on the hull simply dissolved, its twisted form unable to exist in the presence of the cascade energy. Captain Jake Morrison watched from the bridge as the wave of quantum disruption expanded from his ship in all directions. Where it touched the Devourer vessels, their adaptive hulls began to break down at the molecular level. The organic components that had made them nearly invincible started tearing themselves apart as their systems tried to adapt to contradictory quantum information. "It's working!" Ryan Blake shouted from his tactical station. "The enemy ships are losing power. Their biomechanical systems are failing." The massive processing facility that had consumed the New Geneva system began to convulse like a dying animal. Sections that had been locked together for months suddenly separated and drifted apart. The green light that had pulsed through its organic corridors flickered and went dark. Dr. Park monitored the cascade's progress as it spread beyond the speed of light through subspace. The quantum disruption is propagating exactly as Maria predicted. It's reaching other star systems where Devourer fleets are concentrated. Across dozens of worlds, the same scene was playing out. Massive biomechanical constructs that had seemed unstoppable suddenly found themselves unable to function. The collective consciousness that had linked the Devourers for millions of years began to fragment as the quantum cascade interfered with their shared mental network. But the most important effect was happening inside the processing facilities themselves. The billions of trapped consciousness patterns that had been held prisoner in the biomechanical matrix were suddenly free. Most were too damaged by their ordeal to survive, but in those final moments, they experienced something they had not felt since their capture: hope. On the bridge of the Defiant, Jake Morrison felt tears running down his face as he watched the enemy fleet tear itself apart. Maria Santos had given her life to make this moment possible, and her sacrifice was saving countless worlds from the same fate that had befallen New Geneva. "Captain, the cascade is reaching the outer edge of Devourer space," Dr. Park reported. "All enemy ships in the affected area are losing power. The quantum disruption is completely overwhelming their adaptive systems." The wave of destruction continued to spread, reaching every corner of the galaxy where the Devourers had established a presence. Their ancient consciousness, which had survived the death of countless civilizations, found itself unable to comprehend or adapt to the chaotic quantum patterns created by human technology. In the core systems where the Devourer civilization had first awakened millions of years ago, massive structures that had existed since the dawn of time began to collapse. The collective consciousness that had driven their expansion across the galaxy fragmented into millions of confused individual minds, each one suddenly alone for the first time in eons. 3 hours after the cascade began, the last Devourer construct went dark. The galaxy's worst nightmare had been ended by a single human ship, and the courage of 180 people who chose to sacrifice everything for others they would never meet. But the cost had been terrible. The USS Defiant had been completely destroyed in the quantum cascade, taking its entire crew with it. Captain Morrison, Dr. Park, Ryan Blake, and all the others had died in the moment the cascade reached its peak. Only their sacrifice had made victory possible. 6 months later, the first Coalition survey ships ventured back into what had been Devourer space. They found dead constructs drifting in empty systems, their biomechanical components reduced to harmless debris. Of the Devourers themselves, there was no trace. Their consciousness patterns had been completely erased by the quantum disruption. The galaxy began the slow process of healing. Colonies that had been evacuated started to return. Trade routes that had been abandoned reopened. The constant fear that had gripped every civilized world for months began to fade as people realized that the ancient enemy was truly gone. On Earth, a memorial service was held in honor of the crew of the USS Defiant. Representatives from every surviving species attended to pay their respects to the humans who had saved them all. The ceremony was broadcast to every world in human space and beyond. Dr. Lisa Park had been found alive in an escape pod, one of only 3 survivors from the entire ship. She stood at the podium in front of the memorial wall that listed the names of all 180 crew members who had died in the quantum cascade. The crew of the USS Defiant represented the best of humanity, she said to the gathered crowd. They were not superhuman warriors or brilliant scientists. They were ordinary people who chose to do something extraordinary when faced with impossible odds. She paused, looking out at the faces of humans and aliens who had come to honor the dead. Captain Morrison once told me that humans have a tendency to solve problems by hitting them with a hammer instead of using elegant solutions. For 20 years, I thought that was a weakness. Now I know it was our greatest strength. The memorial service concluded with the announcement of the Santos Institute for Quantum Research, named in honor of Chief Engineer Maria Santos. The institute would study the quantum cascade effect and develop new technologies to protect the galaxy from future threats. The crude, inelegant methods that humans use to manipulate space-time would be refined and improved, but never made too sophisticated to be effective. In the years that followed, the quantum cascade technology revolutionized space travel and communication throughout the galaxy. The same chaotic quantum patterns that had destroyed the Devourers proved incredibly useful for faster-than-light transportation and instantaneous communication across vast distances. The sacrifice of one human ship had not only saved the galaxy from its worst nightmare, but had also laid the foundation for a new age of cooperation and understanding between species. The Devourer threat had forced every civilized world to work together, and that cooperation continued long after the danger had passed. Children growing up on Earth and the colony worlds learned about the USS Defiant in their history classes. They learned about courage, sacrifice, and the importance of standing up to evil even when victory seemed impossible. Most importantly, they learned that being human meant being willing to light a candle in the darkness, no matter how small that light might seem. The galaxy was safe once again, protected not by superior weapons or brilliant strategies, but by the simple human refusal to give up when others were counting on them. It was a lesson that would be remembered for generations to come. As the meeting ended, General Johnson began planning the largest military operation in human history. They were going back to save a galaxy that had scorned T-Fleet Admiral Tony Martinez, stood on the bridge of the human flagship watching the largest military force in human history prepare for battle. 4 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council. Now they were returning, but not as the helpful servants they had once been. Through the view screen, Tony could see thousands of human warships arranged in perfect formation. These were not the ships that had left Council space 4 years ago. These were new vessels, built with technology that the Council had never seen, technology that humans had developed in secret while the galaxy tore itself apart. "Admiral," called Captain Julie Evans from her position at the tactical station. "Long-range sensors show massive void-touched presence in the Andromeda sector. At least 50 ships, sir." Tony nodded. The reconnaissance missions had brought back exactly what they expected to find. The entities from dark space had established feeding points throughout the former Council territory. They were growing stronger every day, feasting on the fear and despair that filled the galaxy. "Any word from the Council?" Tony asked. "Councilor Zek has sent another 17 messages in the past week, sir, all requesting immediate assistance, all offering complete surrender to human authority in exchange for help." Tony smiled, but it was not a pleasant expression. Too little, too late. We're not here to answer their requests. We're here to clean up their mess on our terms. Behind him, President Tyler Jackson appeared on the main communication screen, broadcasting from Earth to the entire human fleet. "Soldiers of humanity," the president began. "4 years ago, we walked away from a galaxy that treated us like servants. We were called useful pets who needed to know our place. Today, we return to show them what our place really is." Tony listened to the speech while studying tactical displays showing the current state of the galaxy. 2/3 of Council space was either under void-touched control or completely uninhabitable due to the various wars still raging between the surviving species. "We do not return as saviors," President Jackson continued. "We do not return as partners. We return as the rightful rulers of a galaxy that proved it cannot govern itself. Any species that survives what comes next will do so under human authority." The president's image disappeared, replaced by the tactical overview of Operation Phoenix. The plan was simple in concept, but massive in scope. Human forces would systematically eliminate every void-touched presence in the galaxy, regardless of what happened to the alien populations caught in the crossfire. "All ships," Tony announced over the fleet communication system. "Operation Phoenix is now active. Remember, we are not here to rescue anyone. We are here to eliminate a threat to human space. Everything else is secondary." The human fleet moved forward into what had once been Council territory. What they found there was worse than anyone had imagined. Commander Noah Campbell led the first assault wave into the Vega system, where a major void-touched base had been established. His ships emerged from hyperspace to find a scene from a nightmare. Void-touched had not simply conquered the system. They had transformed it. The planets hung in space like rotting fruit, their surfaces twisted into impossible shapes that hurt to look at. Reality itself seemed unstable around their ships, bending and warping in ways that made his crew sick. "Sir," called Lieutenant Dave Wilson from the sensor station, "I'm reading massive civilian populations on the surface, but the life signs are wrong." Noah studied the readings. The people down there were alive, but their mental patterns showed nothing but pure terror and despair. The void-touched were keeping them that way on purpose, farming their fear like humans farmed crops. "Open fire on all void-touched vessels," Noah ordered. "Do not target the planets unless there are no other options." The battle that followed was unlike anything in recorded history. Human weapons, developed in 4 years of secret research, tore through void-touched defenses like paper, but the entities did not fight like normal enemies. They used reality itself as a weapon, twisting space and time to confuse human targeting systems. Noah watched his ships advance steadily through the system, destroying everything that registered as a void-touched entity. But he also watched the planets below, where billions of alien civilians continued to suffer. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving surrender messages from the surface, multiple species begging for rescue." No response, Noah said firmly. "Our job is to eliminate the void-touched, not rescue aliens who let this happen in the first place." The battle lasted 6 hours. When it was over, every void-touched ship in the system had been destroyed. But the planets remained twisted and broken, their populations traumatized beyond repair. This scene repeated itself across the galaxy as human forces moved from system to system. They were efficient, ruthless, and completely focused on their primary mission. The void-touched had never faced an enemy like this. General Rachel Scott led the final assault on the source point, the original breach where the entities had first entered normal space. Her forces included the most advanced weapons humanity had ever built, devices that could manipulate reality itself. The source point was located in what had once been the heart of Council space, near the ruins of Zentari Prime. The entire region was now a twisted wasteland where physics worked differently, and time moved in circles. "General," reported Colonel Sam Turner from his position aboard the command ship, "we're detecting massive void-touched presence at the source point. They're trying to open a permanent gateway for their main invasion force." Rachel studied the tactical displays. The entities had built a massive structure around the breach point, something that looked like a cross between a space station and a cancer tumor. It pulsed with dark energy that made her feel cold just looking at it. "All ships, final assault formation," she ordered. "We end this here and now." The battle for the source point was the most intense fighting of the entire war. The void touched. Threw everything they had at the human fleet, but they had underestimated what 4 years of secret weapons development could accomplish. Human ships fired weapons that deleted sections of space itself. They deployed devices that reset local reality to its original state, forcing the entities back into the dark spaces where they belonged. They used technologies that the Council had never dreamed of, tools that could rewrite the fundamental laws of physics. When the fighting ended, the source point was not just sealed. It was completely erased from existence, replaced with a section of reinforced space-time that could never be breached again. The void touched were gone, banished back to the darkness between dimensions. But the galaxy they left behind was broken, beyond repair. President Jackson stood before the human assembly on Earth, delivering a speech that would be remembered for centuries. "The threat has been eliminated," he announced. "The void touched have been defeated and their breach points sealed permanently. The galaxy is safe from cosmic horror." He paused and looked out at the assembled representatives. "But the galaxy is not the same place it was before. 2/3 of Council space is uninhabitable. Most of the species that once ruled the stars are extinct or reduced to scattered refugees." The president activated a holographic display showing the current state of galactic civilization. Vast areas were marked in red, indicating dead or abandoned systems. The few remaining pockets of civilization were small and isolated. Humanity now controls all major trade routes, all strategic resources, and all advanced technology. The species that survived the chaos did so only because we allowed it. This is the new reality. He looked directly at the cameras that would broadcast, his words across human space. "We walked away once because we were treated like servants. We have returned as masters. Any alien species that wishes to rebuild their civilization will do so under human oversight and according to human law." Ambassador Jake Morrison, now much older than when he had first walked out of the council chamber, was given the task of establishing the new galactic order. He set up his headquarters in the ruins of Zentari Prime, where the old council had once met. The few surviving alien leaders who came to meet with him were a pathetic sight. Councillor Zek of the Altarian Commonwealth arrived with only a small escort, representing what remained of his once mighty species. A handful of Zellan refugees came seeking permission to establish a new colony. Even a few Vikari survivors appeared, begging for protection from human forces. "Welcome to the new Galactic Order," Jake told them as they gathered in what had once been the Grand Council chamber. "You will notice some changes from the old system." The chamber was much smaller now, with simple human chairs replacing the elaborate alien seating arrangements. Human flags hung from the walls instead of the banners of dozens of different species. "First," Jake continued, "all military forces in human-controlled space will be under direct human command. Second, all major economic decisions will require human approval. Third, all technology sharing will be at human discretion only." Councillor Zek raised one of his 4 hands. "Ambassador Morrison, Surely there can be some room for negotiation, some recognition of our historical status as founding members of the galactic community. Jake L. Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive council chamber. Around him sat hundreds of alien beings from across the galaxy. Some looked like giant insects with wings that sparkled in the light. Others had blue skin and 4 arms. The crystal. Beings from the far world sat perfectly still, their bodies reflecting light like living diamonds. All of them were watching Jake with worry in their eyes. The human ambassador wore his dress uniform for the last time. The dark blue fabric had served him well for 20 years. Today, it would carry humanity's final words to the galaxy that had been their home for 300 years. Jake cleared his throat. The sound echoed in the quiet chamber. "I speak for all of humanity today," he began. His voice was calm and steady. "We have served this galaxy for 3 centuries. We have fought your wars. We have died for your peace. We have given everything we had to give." A Zephyrian delegate with silver feathers covering his bird-like head leaned forward. "Ambassador Morrison, surely we can work out our differences. Humanity has always been reasonable." Jake shook his head slowly. "We were reasonable when you asked us to fight the border wars while you stayed safe at home. We were reasonable when you sent our children to die in the Outer Rim conflicts. We were reasonable when you called us warmongers for doing what you asked us to do." The chamber erupted in angry voices from dozens of species. The translator devices worked overtime to convert the chaos into words Jake could understand. He waited for the noise to die down. "We are done being reasonable," Jake continued. "Humanity officially withdraws from all galactic affairs. We will no longer serve as your soldiers, your explorers, or your peacekeepers. We are going home." On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Lisa Harper stood on the bridge of the Resilient. Her ship was one of the last human vessels still on patrol duty. The stars looked the same as always through the main viewer, but everything felt different. "Now, Captain, we're receiving the withdrawal signal from Earth Command," reported Lieutenant Bobby Chen from the communications station. He was young, maybe 25, and this was his first assignment in deep space. "All human ships are ordered to return to Sol system immediately." Lisa nodded. She had been expecting this for months. The signs were everywhere if you knew how to look. Human colonies had been quietly packing up. Military bases were being emptied. Scientists were sending their research back to Earth. "Set course for home, Bobby," she said. "Maximum warp." The young officer's fingers moved across his control panel. "Course laid in, Captain. But what about the mining station on Kepler 7? They're expecting our protection from the raiders." Lisa felt a pain in her chest. The mining station was run by a peaceful species called the Gentle Ones. They had purple skin and spoke in whispers. They couldn't fight the pirates who sometimes attacked their convoys. For 10 years, human ships like the Resilient had kept them safe. "The Gentle Ones will have to find another protector," Lisa said quietly. "Our orders are clear." She pressed a button on her command chair. "All hands, this is the captain. We have new orders from Earth Command. We are going home for good. I know this is hard. I know we're leaving behind people who depend on us. But sometimes walking away is the only choice left." The ship turned toward Earth and jumped to faster-than-light speed. Behind them, the Kepler system grew smaller until it disappeared completely. Back on Earth, Admiral Kevin Brooks watched the massive display screen in Fleet Command. Thousands of green dots showed human ships throughout the galaxy. Each dot was a vessel coming home. Each vessel carried men and women who had spent their lives serving others. "Status report," Kevin said, to his aide, Colonel Mary Foster. 60% of our ships have acknowledged the withdrawal order," Mary replied. She was a small woman with short gray hair and tired eyes. "The colonies are packing up faster than expected. Everyone wants to leave." Kevin understood why. For generations, humans had been the galaxy's emergency response team. When wars broke out, they called humans. When dangerous new worlds needed exploring, They sent humans. When someone needed to make the hard choices, they asked humans to decide. It had started small. Earth had joined the Galactic Council as the newest member. They were eager to prove themselves worthy of membership. When the first crisis came, humans volunteered to help. They were good at solving problems and fighting when necessary, but one crisis led to another. Soon, humans were fighting in every corner of the galaxy. They became known as the species that would do what others wouldn't. The species that could be counted on to sacrifice for the greater good. The problem was that sacrifice became expected. Other species stopped building their own armies. They stopped training their own diplomats to handle tough situations. Why should they when humans would do it for them? "Sir, we're getting messages from the Council," Mary said. "They want to negotiate. The Zephyrian Empire is offering us better trade deals. The Crystal Collective says they'll share their technology with us." Kevin laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Where were those offers 50 years ago, or 100? They wait until we're leaving to suddenly become generous." On the far edge of the galaxy, Dr. Rachel Stone packed her laboratory equipment into cargo containers. She was humanity's leading expert on alien biology and behavior. Her research had helped prevent dozens of wars by teaching different species how to understand each other. Her assistant, Dr. Peter Walsh, carried a box of data crystals to the transport ship. "Doctor, the Aquatic Dominion is begging us to stay. They say the Torvan hegemony will attack them without human peacekeepers to keep order." Rachel sealed the last container. Inside were samples from 1,000 different worlds and notes from 30 years of studying alien life. The Aquatic Dominion should have thought of that before they voted against giving humans voting rights in the Council. She remembered that. Vote clearly. It had happened 5 years ago. Humans had asked for an equal voice in galactic government since they were doing most of the work to keep it running. Species after species had voted no. They wanted human protection without human influence. "But people will die," Peter said. "People are already dying," Rachel replied. "Human people. My nephew died fighting in the Rim Wars last year. My daughter lost her husband in the mining conflicts. How many human families have to suffer before we're allowed to say no?" The transport ship lifted off from the research station. Rachel watched through a small window as the alien world fell away below them. She had spent half her life there, learning about creatures that thought in ways no human could imagine. Now she would never see them again. Throughout the galaxy, the same scene played out on 1,000 worlds. Human teachers gathered their students one last time. Human doctors finished treating their patients. Human engineers shut down the systems they had built to keep alien civilizations running. The aliens watched in growing panic as humans packed their belongings and left. Some tried to stop them with offers of money or status. Others begged them to stay. A few even threatened them, which only made the humans more determined to leave. Jake Morrison finished his speech to the Galactic Council with words that would be remembered for centuries. "We came to this galaxy with open hearts and willing hands. We wanted to be part of something bigger than ourselves, but you never wanted partners. You wanted servants who would fight and die and ask for nothing in return." He looked around the chamber one last time. "You got what you wanted. Now you can see how well the galaxy works without us." Jake turned and walked toward the exit. His security team followed him, their boots echoing on the metal floor. Behind them, hundreds of alien. Voices rose in panic and anger. The age of human service was over. The galaxy was about to learn what it had lost.